Have you ever watched a brilliant process improvement idea crash and burn? You know this scenario. A team of experts creates the perfect workflow, rolls out shiny new tools, and expects everyone to fall in line. But instead of success, you get chaos. Users bypass the system, complaints explode, and leadership scratches their heads, wondering why nothing changed. Here's the brutal truth nobody wants to admit. Most process improvements don't fail because the ideas are bad. They fail because the people who actually live with these processes every day were completely left out of the solution. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how to fix this. I've spent years working in environments where change wasn't just difficult, it was actively sabotaged. I'm talking about legacy systems older than some employees, habits so entrenched they might as well be carved in stone, and that infamous phrase that kills innovation dead in its tracks. We've always done it this way. But here's what I discovered. Meaningful change doesn't happen when you force it. It happens when you invite people into it. And that shift in approach changes everything. Let me paint you a picture of what usually goes wrong. Process improvement typically starts with good intentions but terrible assumptions. A team of experts maps out a beautiful new workflow, deploys cutting-edge tools, and assumes everyone will just adapt. But what actually happens next? Users find creative ways to bypass the new system entirely. Complaints spike through the roof. Adoption stalls completely, and leadership sits in meetings wondering why their metrics aren't moving despite all their investment. Sound familiar? The problem isn't the process itself, it's the approach. When change is designed in isolation, people experience it as disruption. When it's co-designed with the people who actually live it every day, it becomes empowerment. I learned this lesson the hard way when I joined a company that was over 200 years old, right in the middle of a hostile outsourcing transition. Trust was at rock bottom. Morale was hanging by a thread. And the appetite for any kind of change? Absolutely non-existent. What worked wasn't some grand strategic initiative. It was a completely human approach. I started by listening, not just to what was obviously broken, but to what was being bypassed, duplicated, or misunderstood. I used what I call light touch data, things like usage logs, turnaround times, and click paths, not to dictate decisions, but to validate what users were already telling me. Then I broke improvements into micro wins, small, visible changes that built momentum and trust instead of fear. And I framed every change as an enabler, not a threat, especially when it touched those sacred legacy tools and habits. This approach didn't just improve processes, it changed the way people felt about improvement itself. Now let me show you the 3 critical strategies that make change actually stick. Strategy 1. Co-design over command. Top-down change breeds pushback every single time. Co-design change builds ownership. Instead of presenting a finished solution, bring users into the design process early. Ask them 3 simple questions. What's broken? What would make this easier? What would you never want to lose? I once worked with a team that was skeptical about a new document management system. So we hosted what we called a design jam, where users actually sketched their ideal interface. The final product reflected their input, and adoption rates soared. This doesn't just improve the solution, it transforms the relationship. Users become co-creators, not just reluctant recipients. Strategy 2. Micro wins build macro trust. Big changes feel risky and overwhelming. Small wins feel doable and safe. I break improvements into bite-sized pieces. Maybe it's a new shortcut that saves 10 clicks, a dashboard tweak that clarifies ownership, a faster approval flow for just one document type. These micro wins build unstoppable momentum. They show users that change can actually help them, not hurt them. For example, instead of overhauling an entire clunky form, we simply added a Save Draft button. It solved a major pain point and open the door to deeper redesigns later. Strategy 3. Frame the narrative carefully. How you talk about change matters just as much as the change itself. I position improvements as enablers. Instead of saying, "We're replacing this system," I say, "We're streamlining your workflow." Instead of, "You'll need to learn this," I say, "You'll be able to accomplish more." When a legacy tool was being retired, instead of announcing its death, we framed the new system as a modern toolkit designed with user input. That tone shift made all the difference in adoption. But here's where most people make a massive mistake. They treat data like gospel. In our dashboard-obsessed world, it's easy to let metrics become the final word. But when it comes to process improvement, data is only half the story. The other half lives in the people who use these processes every day. I use what I call light touch data. Simple metrics that are easy to collect and directional, not overwhelming. Things like usage logs showing who's using what and how often. Click paths revealing how many steps it takes to complete a task. Time on task data showing if users are spending more time than expected. Abandon rates telling us where people give up. These signals help validate what users tell me. If someone says a tool is clunky and the click path shows 12 steps for what should be a 3-step task, that's valuable confirmation. But I never treat these metrics as final verdicts. They're breadcrumbs, not conclusions. Let me tell you about the dashboard that lied. We rolled out a new reporting dashboard and metrics showed a 40% drop in time on task. Success, right? Wrong. User feedback told a completely different story. The dashboard was faster, but much harder to understand. People were spending less time but making significantly more mistakes. We had optimized for speed instead of clarity. After adding tooltips, simplifying filters, and running a proper feedback loop, time on task went back up slightly, but accuracy and confidence improved dramatically. The lesson? Always triangulate your data with 3 points. What do the numbers say? What do users feel? And what do you observe in action? Now, let me share the sticky note mapping technique that reveals the real process, not the documented fantasy. Here's how it works. Invite 5 to 7 end users who touch the process regularly. Give each person a stack of sticky notes and markers. Ask them to write down every single step they actually take, 1 step per note. Then arrange these notes on a wall or whiteboard. Group duplicates, highlight bypasses, and flag confusion points. Finally, overlay your light touch data to validate the pain points. What you'll get is a messy, honest, and incredibly useful map of the real process. More importantly, you'll have a shared understanding of what's actually broken and what's worth fixing. Here's something crucial most people miss. Not everything that's broken deserves fixing. Just because something isn't working doesn't mean it's worth your time and energy. I always ask 3 questions. Does this step create value? Does it reduce risk? Does it improve clarity? If the answer is no to all 3, maybe the best fix is removing it entirely. I once discovered a mid-level manager had to approve every purchase over $500. Usage logs showed they approved 98% of requests without any changes. When we interviewed them, they admitted they didn't even review most submissions, just clicked approve. We eliminated the step, added a monthly audit instead, and saved 40 hours a month across the team. But what about resistance? Here's the thing. Resistance to change isn't a character flaw. It's actually a feature, not a bug. It's how people protect what's familiar, what works, and what they've built their confidence around. When we treat resistance as a problem to eliminate, we miss the opportunity to understand what's really at stake. Resistance shows up in many forms. Passive avoidance, where people claim they didn't see important emails. Legacy loyalty, where teams cling to familiar tools. Fear of obsolescence, where people worry about their roles becoming irrelevant. And change fatigue from too many failed initiatives. These reactions aren't irrational, they're protective. People resist change when they don't feel safe, heard, or involved. The antidote isn't more training or stricter enforcement, it's trust. I run resistance mapping workshops where I invite a cross-section of stakeholders, including the biggest skeptics. We create a shared canvas where everyone writes down their fears, frustrations, and hopes about the proposed change. Then we group responses into themes and discuss each one openly, with no defensiveness allowed. Finally, we co-create a change charter that reflects shared goals and guardrails. The outcome is a transparent map of resistance points, a co-authored plan for moving forward, and most importantly, a sense of psychological safety and shared ownership. Remember, this isn't about perfection, it's about iteration. Process maps should be living documents, not static monuments. I revisit them quarterly, especially after major changes, and I always invite users back to the table. The key insight that changed everything for me is this. Change doesn't have to be painful, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but it absolutely has to be human. Whether you're a leader trying to drive change without burning bridges, an analyst drowning in data but starving for insight, an end user who wants to be heard instead of herded, or anyone who's ever asked, why does this process even exist? This approach works. If you've ever felt stuck between what's possible and what's practical, you're in the right place. The path forward isn't through force or fancy tools. It's through listening, involving, and iterating with the people who make your processes come alive every day. Stop mapping the ideal flow and start mapping the mess. Stop treating data as a verdict and start using it as a conversation starter. Stop rolling out change and start inviting people into it. Because at the end of the day, the most sophisticated process improvement in the world means nothing if the people who live it every day don't believe in it. Make them co-creators, not just end users. Build trust through micro wins, not massive disruptions. And always remember that behind every process, every system, and every workflow are real people trying to do good work. That's how you make change stick. Not through perfect processes, but through human-centered improvement that honors the people who make everything work. What if I told you that the biggest obstacle to successful change isn't resistance to new ideas, but the broken system we use to implement those ideas? Welcome back to our series on organizational transformation. I'm diving into part 2 of our journey, where we shift from understanding problems to actually designing solutions that stick. Today we're exploring 3 game-changing concepts that most organizations completely overlook. First, how to turn your biggest skeptics into your strongest advocates. Second, why your change management process itself might be sabotaging your efforts. And third, the hidden psychological barriers that make even simple processes feel impossible to follow. If you've ever wondered why brilliant solutions die in committee meetings, or why users abandon perfectly logical workflows, this video will give you the answers and the tools to fix it. Let's start with the elephant in the room. You can design the most elegant process in the world, validate it with mountains of data, and roll it out with military precision. But if people don't buy into it, it becomes digital shelfware. And here's what most leaders get wrong about buy-in. Buy-in isn't about agreement. It's about ownership. There's a world of difference between someone saying, "I'll try it," and "I helped build it." When people feel excluded from the design process, even the best improvements get met with passive resistance. But when they feel seen, heard, and genuinely involved, they become champions of change. So how do you create that sense of ownership? It starts with mapping your stakeholders, but not the obvious ones. Sure, you need managers and approvers on board, but the real influencers are often hidden in plain sight. The veteran employee who knows every workaround in the system, the administrator who fields all the complaints, the junior staffer who quietly fixes broken steps behind the scenes. I learned this lesson working with a team to redesign a complex workflow. During our stakeholder analysis, we discovered a mid-level coordinator who wasn't on any org chart, but was the go-to person for troubleshooting. Instead of designing around her, we brought her into the process. She became the loudest advocate for the new system because she helped shape it. Here's your first practical strategy. Before launching any change initiative, ask 3 critical questions. Who actually touches this process day to day? Who feels its pain most acutely? And who has the informal power to make or break adoption? Then tailor your engagement to each group. Some stakeholders need hard data to be convinced. Others need empathy and recognition. All of them need clarity about what's changing and why. But stakeholder mapping is just the beginning. The second element of building genuine buy-in is creating feedback loops that actually loop. Most organizations are great at collecting feedback, but terrible at acting on it. They send surveys, hold town halls, and gather input, then disappear into conference rooms to make decisions. Real feedback loops are lightweight, recurring, and most importantly, visible. I use quick polls after rollouts, monthly pulse checks with users, and open office hours for questions and concerns. But here's the crucial part. You have to show people what you did with their input. I publish regular "You Said, We Did" summaries that highlight specific changes made based on user feedback. After launching a new intake form, we got feedback that the priority field was confusing. We could have dismissed it as user error or added it to a future enhancement list. Instead, we clarified the language within days, added examples, and shared the update in a team-wide email. Adoption jumped 30% the following week. People saw that their voices mattered, so they stayed engaged. The third pillar of building buy-in is making change visible. Most improvement efforts fail quietly. They get proposed, reviewed, shuffled between committees, and eventually shelved without any feedback or closure. This creates a culture where people stop participating because they assume nothing will happen anyway. I fix this by creating transparency at every stage. Dashboards that show request status in real time. Progress boards that highlight wins and celebrate contributions. Monthly showcases where teams demo implemented improvements. When people see that change is actually happening and that it's worth engaging with, they're more likely to invest their energy. But here's where most organizations hit their next roadblock. Even with perfect stakeholder buy-in, change efforts still fail because the process for managing change is fundamentally broken. This brings us to our second major concept: fixing the fixers. Every organization has a system for proposing, reviewing, and implementing process improvements. And more often than not, that system creates more friction than the problems it's trying to solve. Change requests pile up in endless intake forms with unclear routing. Committees meet monthly but make decisions quarterly. Governance layers slow everything down. The very mechanism meant to drive improvement becomes a bottleneck. Here's the irony. We spend enormous energy optimizing individual workflows while ignoring the meta workflow that controls them all. It's like trying to improve traffic flow while refusing to look at the traffic light timing system. I start by mapping the change pipeline, just like any other workflow. How do ideas enter the system? Who reviews them and how often? What criteria determine approval or rejection? How is progress tracked and communicated? When you visualize this process, the problems become obvious. At one company, we discovered that change requests were being routed through 6 different email inboxes before landing with the right team. No wonder people were frustrated. We built a single intake form with smart routing logic and cut turnaround time by 60%. The next step is auditing your governance layer. Governance is important, but when it becomes gatekeeping instead of guidance, it kills momentum. I look for decisions being made at the wrong level, approvals based on habit rather than risk, and meetings that review problems instead of solving them. One team needed approval for every template update, even fixing typos. We created a low-risk change lane with predefined categories that received automatic approval. Productivity jumped, trust improved, and the governance team could focus on truly strategic decisions. The third element is making the change process itself visible. Most improvement efforts fail quietly without feedback or closure. I fix this with status dashboards, regular showcases of implemented improvements, and clear communication about what's happening and when. Now let's tackle the third, and perhaps most overlooked barrier to successful process adoption: cognitive load. This is where psychology meets process design, and where most technical solutions fall apart. Most process maps assume users are robots with perfect memory, infinite patience, and zero distractions. But real people bring real brains to work, and those brains have very real limits. When workflows are cluttered, unclear, or cognitively demanding, users burn out, make mistakes, or simply disengage. Cognitive load comes in three flavors. Intrinsic load is the complexity inherent in the task itself. Extraneous load is friction caused by poor design. And germane load is effort that leads to learning and mastery. Good process design minimizes extraneous load while supporting germane load. You'll recognize high cognitive load when you see frequent errors or omissions, users relying on memory instead of system prompts, long onboarding times, email workarounds, and complaints like "this is confusing" or "I always forget that step." These aren't user failures, they're design failures. The first strategy for reducing cognitive load is eliminating visual and instructional clutter. I audit this by asking whether instructions are clear and concise, whether the layout is intuitive, and whether users are forced to scroll, toggle, or guess. Then I simplify using progressive disclosure, replacing long instructions with contextual tooltips, and grouping related fields visually. A form I worked on had 27 fields on one screen. We broke it into 3 logical sections with collapsible panels. Completion rates improved by 40% and error rates dropped by half. The second strategy is building memory into the system instead of expecting users to remember everything. I add smart defaults based on previous entries, inline guidance and examples, and visual cues like icons, color coding, and status indicators. One workflow required users to manually enter department codes. We added a drop-down with recent selections and search functionality. Accuracy improved, and frustration dropped dramatically. The third strategy is designing for flow, not just function. A process can be technically correct and still feel completely wrong. I look for interruptions that break momentum, steps that feel out of sequence, and tasks that require switching between tools or tabs. A report submission process required toggling between 3 different systems. We built a unified interface with embedded links and integrated status tracking. Submission time dropped by 60%. Here's a practical exercise you can do with your team. Choose one high-friction process and observe 3 to 5 users completing it while asking them to narrate their thought process aloud. Note where they hesitate, backtrack, or make guesses. Identify sources of extraneous cognitive load, like unclear labels or missing cues. Then, co-create a redesign plan focused on clarity and flow. This exercise reveals hidden friction points, creates a simplified, user-friendly version of your process, and builds shared understanding of what intuitive really means. Let me bring these concepts together with a real-world example. I worked with an organization whose project approval process was notorious for delays and confusion. Stakeholders complained about black box decisions, requesters abandoned proposals midstream, and approvers felt overwhelmed by unclear submissions. We started by mapping all stakeholders, including hidden influencers like the executive assistant who scheduled review meetings and the IT coordinator who handled system access. We brought them into the design process from day one. Next, we mapped the approval pipeline and discovered 12 different handoffs, 3 redundant review stages, and no visibility into status or timeline. We streamlined the flow, created automated routing, and built real-time dashboards. Finally, we addressed cognitive load by redesigning the submission form with progressive disclosure, adding contextual help, and creating visual indicators for required information. We also built templates and examples directly into the system. The results were dramatic. Approval time dropped from 6 weeks to 10 days. Submission completion rates increased by 70%. Most importantly, satisfaction scores from both requesters and approvers improved significantly. But the real success was cultural. People started seeing the approval process as helpful rather than hindering. They engaged more actively, provided better feedback, and even suggested additional improvements. This transformation happened because we addressed all 3 barriers simultaneously. We built genuine stakeholder buy-in through involvement and visibility. We fixed the broken change management system that was creating bottlenecks. And we designed for human cognitive limitations rather than fighting against them. The key insight is that successful process improvement isn't just about optimizing individual workflows. It's about creating an ecosystem where change is welcomed, managed effectively, and designed for real human beings. Your homework after watching this video is to pick one struggling process in your organization and audit it against these 3 dimensions. Map your hidden stakeholders and assess their level of genuine buy-in. Trace your change management pipeline and identify bottlenecks. Observe users in action and note cognitive friction points. You'll probably discover that the technical solution you thought you needed is actually the easy part. The real opportunity lies in building relationships, streamlining governance, and designing for the way people actually think and work. In our next video, we'll explore how to measure the unmeasurable, turning soft benefits like user satisfaction and cultural change into hard business metrics that executives care about. We'll also dive into the sustainability challenge, how to ensure your improvements stick long after the initial excitement wears off. Remember, change doesn't stick because it's perfect. It sticks because people believe in it. When you build with your users rather than for them, you create more than a process improvement. You create a movement. If this resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss the next part of our series. Drop a comment about your biggest process improvement challenge, and I'll do my best to address it in future videos. Until next time, keep designing change that actually works. What's the biggest mistake organizations make after launching a new process? They think the hard work is done. The rollout happens, the training wraps up, everyone's excited about the shiny new workflow, and then crickets. 6 months later, people are back to their old habits. Workarounds have crept in, and that amazing improvement project becomes just another initiative that didn't stick. If you've been following this series, you know we've covered finding the real problems behind broken processes and designing solutions that actually work for real people. Today, we're tackling the final piece of the puzzle: how to keep those improvements alive and thriving long after the initial excitement wears off. Because here's the truth: real process improvement isn't a launch, it's a lifestyle. And if you want change to stick, you need to build sustainability into the DNA of how your team operates. Let me start with why even well-designed processes decay over time. It's not because people are lazy or resistant to change. Systems naturally drift, and there are predictable reasons why this happens. First, staff turnover means new people join who weren't part of the original design process. They don't understand the why behind the workflow, so they default to what feels familiar. Second, tools get updated, breaking parts of your carefully crafted process. Third, new priorities emerge that shift attention away from maintaining the improvements you've made. I've seen teams abandon perfectly good processes because a software update moved a button and no one updated the documentation. I've watched new hires create shadow processes because they weren't properly onboarded to the improved workflow. These aren't failures of character, they're failures of planning. The solution is to treat sustainment as part of your rollout strategy, not an afterthought. When I design process improvements, I immediately start planning the maintenance rhythm. This means scheduling quarterly retrospectives before the process even launches. It means assigning process owners who will champion the workflow long-term, not just project managers who move on to the next initiative. I create what I call living documentation that evolves with the process. Traditional documentation gets written once and forgotten. Living documentation has built-in review cycles, feedback loops, and update triggers. When someone spots a gap or improvement, there's a clear path to evolve the process rather than work around it. Here's a practical example from a team I worked with recently. They launched a new client intake form that worked beautifully for 6 months. Then, usage dropped dramatically. When we investigated, we discovered that new team members hadn't been trained on it, and the link had gotten buried in their communication channels. The fix was simple. We added the form training to their onboarding checklist and pinned the link in their main collaboration space. Usage rebounded immediately. But the real lesson was building these checkpoints into our sustainment calendar from day one. Now they have monthly pulse checks, specifically designed to catch these kinds of drift patterns before they become problems. This brings me to the second strategy: creating rituals that reinforce change. One-time training sessions create awareness, but rituals create habits. I help teams build lightweight practices that keep process improvement alive in their daily work. One of my favorite examples is a support team that starts every Monday with a 10-minute workflow warm-up. They share one tip, discuss one tweak, and celebrate one process win from the previous week. It sounds simple, but this ritual has created a culture where everyone feels ownership over their workflows. They catch small issues before they become big problems, and they continuously evolve their processes based on real experience. Another team implemented monthly process pulse meetings, where they asked 2 questions: what's working well, and what feels weird? The language matters here. Weird is less threatening than broken, so people are more honest about pain points. These sessions have surfaced dozens of micro improvements that collectively made a massive difference in their efficiency. The key is making these rituals feel valuable, not bureaucratic. They should solve real problems and generate actionable insights, not just checkboxes on a sustainability checklist. Now let's talk about one of the most important aspects of sustaining change: how to handle drift when it happens. And it will happen. The question isn't whether your process will evolve, it's whether that evolution is intentional or accidental. I track drift by comparing current behavior to the intended workflow. I interview users about what they've changed and why. I look for patterns in the workarounds people create. But here's the crucial part: I don't assume all drift is bad. Sometimes people modify processes because they've discovered something better. Sometimes drift reveals insights that lead to significant improvements. I once worked with a team that stopped using a shared project tracker and switched to managing everything through group chat. At first glance, this looked like non-compliance. But when we dug deeper, we realized the chat was actually faster, clearer, and more collaborative than the tracker. Instead of forcing them back to the old system, we redesigned the tracker to incorporate the strengths of their chat-based approach. The result was a hybrid solution that gave them the benefits of both structured tracking and real-time collaboration. Adoption skyrocketed because we treated their drift as innovation, not rebellion. This mindset shift is crucial. When teams know that their adaptations will be heard and potentially incorporated, they're more likely to suggest improvements rather than just work around problems silently. Let me show you a practical framework for building this kind of sustainment into your process improvements. I call it the Sustainment Calendar Sprint, and it's designed to be done right after your initial rollout. Gather your process owners and frontline users together. Create a shared calendar or timeline that covers the next 12 months. Start by asking the fundamental question: what will help this change stay alive? Then, schedule your sustainment activities. Plan retrospectives every quarter, not just in the first few months. Assign specific ownership for each check-in. Don't assume someone else will remember to do it. Build in refresh cycles where you update documentation, retrain new team members, and communicate wins across the organization. Create a visibility plan that keeps the improvement top of mind. This might include dashboard updates, success story sharing in team meetings, or simple reminders in your communication channels. The goal is to make the improved process feel normal and valued, not special or temporary. Most importantly, schedule time to capture and act on the insights you gather. There's nothing more demoralizing than providing feedback that disappears into a void. Build clear feedback loops where observations turn into actions, and actions get communicated back to the team. Here's what this looks like in practice. One team I worked with created a quarterly process health check where they review metrics, interview users, and identify one small improvement to implement. They also scheduled monthly shout-outs where they celebrate examples of the process working well. These simple rituals have kept their workflow improvements fresh and relevant for over 2 years. The outcome of this approach is a sustainment calendar with clear checkpoints, a rhythm of reflection and reinforcement, and most importantly, shared commitment to keeping change alive. Teams that build this kind of maintenance culture see dramatically higher adoption rates and longer-lasting improvements. Let's talk about measuring sustainment success. Traditional metrics focus on initial adoption, how many people use the new process in the first month. But sustainment metrics look at consistency over time. Are people still using it 6 months later? Has the quality of outcomes improved? Do new team members adopt it naturally? I track leading indicators like engagement in feedback sessions, suggestions submitted for improvements, and proactive problem reporting. These signals tell me whether the team feels ownership over their process or just compliance pressure. I also measure adaptation quality. When teams modify processes, are the changes improvements or regressions? Are they documenting their innovations or hiding them? Teams with healthy sustainment cultures iterate openly and share their discoveries. One of the most powerful metrics I use is what I call process confidence. Do people trust that their workflow will continue to evolve and improve? Teams with high process confidence report issues quickly, suggest improvements actively, and onboard new members effectively. They see their processes as living systems they own, not rigid rules they follow. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. What happens when leadership changes or new priorities emerge? These are the moments when process improvements often get abandoned, even when they're working well. The best defense against this kind of disruption is making your improvements obviously valuable and deeply embedded in daily work. When a process saves people time, reduces frustration, and produces better outcomes, it becomes harder to abandon. When team members are actively involved in maintaining and improving the workflow, they become advocates who can articulate its value to new leadership. I also recommend creating what I call improvement artifacts, concrete evidence of the positive impact your process changes have made. This might include before and after metrics, user testimonials, or case studies that show clear business value. These artifacts become powerful tools for protecting your investments when organizational winds shift. Documentation also plays a crucial role here. Not just the how-to guides, but the why documentation. Capture the original problems you were solving, the design decisions you made, and the results you achieved. Future teams will thank you for this context when they need to understand or evolve your work. Let me share a story that illustrates this perfectly. I worked with a marketing team that had developed an elegant content approval workflow. It reduced review time by 60% and virtually eliminated revision loops. But when a new marketing director joined, They wanted to implement their own process from their previous company. Because the team had documented not just their workflow, but the problems it solved and the value it created, they were able to have a productive conversation about the benefits of their current approach. The new director was impressed by the data and the team's ownership of the process. Instead of scrapping everything, they incorporated a few elements from their previous experience to make an already good process even better. This is what sustainment success looks like. Not rigid adherence to original designs, but thoughtful evolution that preserves value while embracing improvement. As we wrap up this series, I want to emphasize that sustaining process improvements is fundamentally about culture, not procedures. You're not just maintaining workflows, you're nurturing a mindset where continuous improvement feels natural and valuable. This means celebrating when people surface problems instead of hiding them. It means treating process adaptation as innovation rather than deviation. It means building rituals that reinforce good habits and create shared ownership over how work gets done. The most successful teams I've worked with understand that their processes are never finished. They're always listening for friction, always looking for opportunities to improve, always ready to evolve. They've built sustainment into their DNA. Your homework from this final video is to create your own sustainment calendar for a recent process improvement. Schedule those quarterly retrospectives, assign process ownership, build in feedback loops and refresh cycles. Most importantly, start treating process improvement as an ongoing capability, not a one-time project. Process improvement that sticks doesn't happen by accident. It happens by design. When you build sustainment from the beginning, when you create rituals that reinforce change, and when you treat drift as data rather than failure, you create improvements that compound over time instead of fading away. The work of making work better never really ends. It just gets more intentional, more collaborative, and more human. And that's exactly how it should be. If this series has helped you think differently about process improvement, I'd love to hear about it. Share your sustainment wins, your ritual experiments, and your drift discoveries. Because the best way to sustain improvement culture is to keep learning from each other. Thanks for joining me on this journey through human-centered process improvement. Now go build something that sticks.